Well, good morning, everyone. For those of you tuning in to our Olideo special with Simon Tyrrell, welcome. I was just saying I've got a bit rusty on these virtuals because it's been the summer and we're coming into autumn now, so we're back at work fully focusing. This is a nice tasting though. It's just a short sort of introduction into Olideo, which is a project that Tindal Wine Merchants has done with our special Irish winemaker, Simon Tyrrell, who is basically the only person in Ireland who is properly making wine, growing the grapes, and focusing on what he really loves. I have a little introduction here. There's a photograph I took earlier of the three bad boys we're going to taste in this tasting. So Olideo saw its first fermentation in the 2016 vintage. For those of you who are new to this, this is a Tindal Wine Merchants sort of project, but Simon has been spearheading it. He went out with William to Spain, went to Yecla and went to Sierra dos Gredos. And sorry, I completely murdered that, Simon. He will correct me later. To find somewhere they could make wine that would produce sort of lovely styles and using old vines that would suit the Irish market, but not be heavy and ripe and overdone. And I think they've done well. We'll find out from our tasting what you guys think. But it's just looking at the fresher styles and older vines and what's sustainably right to do in vineyards with climate change and global warming. So Simon, I'm going to come off screen share in a minute and focus on you. But do you think it's fair to say you're a sympathetic winemaker? I thought that was quite a good question to start with. You're always looking not for your stamp, but an expression of sight. Am I right?
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Harry. I think that is an interesting term. I'd actually probably slightly change that and say that I think that definitely looking for expression of the site, and that's why, as a company, we chose Yecla and the Sierra de Gredos, because they're two very interesting, not new sites because they've been around for a long time, but they are perhaps emerging as part of the new Spain, this really exciting winemaking country. I think the sympathetic bit that has evolved over the years since I started making wine is more about how to treat the grapes, and to understand how not to overdo things. So, and that's not to say that it's not an idea of hands-off winemaking, because I don't necessarily believe in that concept. As a winemaker, you always have your hands on in some way, even if you're actually doing nothing, you're making a decision. So it's a constant process. But I think it's more about allowing the grapes that you harvest to express themselves in the best possible way. And I think it's a sympathetic approach, that you don't do too much, particularly in terms of extraction. So I think you're right. It's to try and express the place where the grapes are grown. But part of that is also not smothering them with over extraction or afterwards with too much oak, etc.
And Simon, obviously you haven't been a winemaker all your life. You don't have a great French or Spanish parent who sort of taught you how to pick grapes when you were 3. Remind us how long you've been making wine for?
So the first vintage was 2012. So I'm just about to start my ninth vintage, which it's funny, you do these things, and when I got into it, I thought, it seemed the future seemed to stretch a long way into the distance, and actually then you count and you go, geez, I've only got maybe another 10, 15 vintages left in me, and time seems suddenly very short. You think, God, I want to try all these different things, but I haven't got that long to do it in. And I think that's why the project that we're doing at Tindal Wine Merchants helps me, and it helps the company hopefully as well, because it also enables me to do several vintages in 1 year in different places.
Well, I'll tell you something funny. Yesterday, when you came around to talk about this and sort of work on our structure, Lucas was so impressed when he heard that you were a winemaker, but he said something really funny. So I'm glad you're following your dream, but this was hilarious in a little boy's mind. He said, but Simon only drives a Golf with a learner plate on it. I think that he thought that as a winemaker, you'd have your private jet coming to collect you. So but we're in it for the love of winemaking rather than.
I remember when I went to Plumpton College to do my viticulture and enology studies, the look of disappointment in the class as one of the lecturers announced that kind of the head winemaker's salary in the UK was somewhere around sort of 28,000 pounds a year. It's a rare thing that winemakers are paid, big bucks, but hey, money's not everything.
No, I think it's amazing. And I love, you've managed throughout COVID to go over and still prune your vines in the Rhone, for Les Deux Cols, and also, just work on all your projects. And, I suppose some of us watching might be a little bit jealous. We've all been stuck in front of our computers, but you have actually been out there in the regions, sort of touching grapes, dealing with vines, and doing that side of the production, which is something that you obviously love.
Yeah, it's certainly been a challenge. I mean, the owning vineyards is great. It's been a culmination of a career in the wine industry, wine business, to reach to that point. But COVID certainly put a lot of obstacles in our path, and thankfully with my partners in Les Deux Cols, we've been able to share some of the work, and we have somebody on the ground out there who managed to acquire their services this year to help us through some of the more tricky bits like spraying. I mean, I think what I've come to realize, the most rewarding part of this business is the sort of holistic approach of it, that you start the year in January by forming the vine for the rest of the year, and then you watch it grow, and you watch the fruit eventually develop in the final months, July and August, and then you get the excitement of transforming those grapes into something that eventually ends up in bottle. And it's a very, very exciting thing to do. I wish I'd done it 20 years ago. But
I love the fact that we're trying two different vintages of the Sueños Olvidadados. Oh my God, my Spanish has got to improve somewhere along the line. So vintage variation is a big thing, and I'm going to screen share again, because we're going to have a look at the sort of extremes of viticulture that you are faced with in Spain. And obviously with hot climates, you've got to continue to try and make the fresher styles that you're looking for. But with this kind of terrain and sort of topography, that makes it a little bit easier, doesn't it? The perception of freshness comes a lot from the site. You don't have to pick early in order to get that balance.
Yeah, I think this is what's been so exciting about the Olideo project, is that as a company we've been able to pick areas that we feel have real potential to produce wines of freshness and fruit and elegance within Spain. And as I was saying earlier, Spain is such an exciting country to be making wine in and buying wine in, because it's got the traditional areas are extremely well known: Rioja, Ribera del Duero, the Penedès for Cava, etc. But that's only really the tip of the iceberg in what's actually the potential of this country. And geographically, it's so interesting because the nature of Spain, with this big high plateau in the middle of the country, means that there are some although it's a hot country, there are some very high altitude parts to it where we can get ripe fruit because we've got all the heat and sunshine, but we also get to retain lots of acidity from this altitude, cooler nights, etc. And I think, and then on top of that, we've got all the different soil varieties going on. So this is a photograph of a place called Monte Arabi, which is in the northern part of the Yecla Valley. And Yecla, or Yecla, as they pronounce it locally, is an hour and a half's drive inland from Alicante on the road to Madrid, just to northwest of Alicante. But as you go up from the coast, you climb and you climb and you climb and you climb, and so that when you get to the bottom of the valley of Yecla, kind of at 500 meters, and then as you go up through the valley, it gets up close to 1,000 meters altitude, which is just fantastic for growing grapes.
Yeah, because everyone talks about Mount Etna being really high altitude, but that's only about 200 meters higher, isn't it?
And I'm not exactly sure how high Etna is, but it's certainly that, you know, I think we've suddenly realized as a winemaking world, this and with climate change, you know, one of the great tools that we have to find balance in the grapes that we're growing is by going high. And Spain, everywhere from down in the south, right on you know, above Malaga, to this part, to the Sierra Cantabria in Rioja, to Ribera Sacra, etc., and Sierra de Gredos. They've got great high altitude vineyards. So, I mean, and also what's interesting is that the varieties that have been planted here, you know, were originally planted because they're very well adapted to this kind of climate. So in Yecla, the predominant grape variety is monastrell or mourvèdre, and you know, in other areas in Spain, we've seen lots of plantings of grape varieties that sometimes leave me a bit confused as to why they plant Cabernet or why they plant Petit Verdot and things like that, when actually, you know, they've got, in places like Yecla, a very strong Mediterranean climate, and really Mediterranean grape varieties like monastrell, mourvèdre are much better suited. So although
what's interesting, sorry to interrupt you there, Simon, what's interesting about the mourvèdre or monastrell is the fact that in France, I noticed that they're really jumping on the mourvèdre train, if you like, because of its ability to withstand drought and hot conditions, and it ripens very late, doesn't it? So the climate change is sort of, you know, it's the future of climate change grape production, I think, because it doesn't lose its freshness when it's ripe, and it ripens so late.
Absolutely. I mean, this harvest, the photograph of this harvest, which is the vineyard that we use, is taken in October. So you know, we wrapped up the harvest in the Rhone well before this. So you know, the grape has plenty of time to get to full phenolic ripeness without being overripe, and you know, still retains plenty of natural acidity.
If you had a caption for this picture, it would be "bottoms up," wouldn't it?
So this is, I mean, this is an extraordinary. So one thing, I think there's several things to notice about this picture. You'll see that the vines are dry farmed. There's no irrigation here. These are 30-year-old vines that have their root systems, you know, well set. And so they can get water from the subsoil because there's not a lot of rain here. It's only 300 odd millimeters a year. You'll also notice how low trained they are, these bush vines. So we're not looking to do, you know, train on wires and maximize the photosynthesis through having very high canopy, because we don't need to. We've got plenty of sunshine, plenty of heat. So they can be trained lower to the ground. But also the interesting thing is, this is we work with a family domain down here which owns 550 hectares, and it's a big domain, but everything is done by hand, everything. So it's 550 hectares of hand harvested fruit. Obviously the pruning is all done by hand. It's a very labor intensive job, but the two advantages are, one, you'll notice that the density of plantation is very low. The spacing between the vines is quite considerable. It's not like in areas of Burgundy or Champagne where they're planting at 7,000 to 10,000 vines per hectare. This is more like 1,000 vines per hectare. And also you notice that the people are actually quite short. So they employ a lot of people from Ecuador who are naturally not that tall, and so they have no problem, bending over low bush trained vines all day harvesting.
Yeah, it's really hard work, bush trained vines, because they sit on the ground, don't they? So
yeah.
And you wouldn't want to be tall or have back problems. I don't see you in there, Simon.
I was sort of going between the winery and the vineyard, directing affairs. So
pointing at them, going, "You missed some." No, you certainly do your work on your vines in the Rhone. So here's a tractor. They have tractors in the Yecla as well.
So it's about 10 kilometers from the winery.
Okay.
So the key, as usual, is to try and get the fruit from the vineyard once it's harvested to the winery as soon as possible. And the good thing at the winery that we use is that they have cold storage, so we can put the cases of grapes into the cold room overnight just to cool them down before we start fermenting.
That's it, because it's super important, isn't it, to keep the temperature of the grapes low, so that when you do ferment, you don't get high temperatures in the fermentation and extract too much tannin, or sort of too much just rough kind of roughness. I suppose rusticity comes from too much heat, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we want the fermentation to start in a really nice slow manner, so the yeast population builds up nice and gradually. So the temperatures start low, and then as the yeast start to work away and increase in numbers, then the temperature rises, and we get a more gentle extraction, and the yeast population isn't stressed either.
So are you using natural yeast populations, or?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's completely indigenous yeast population. There's, when you go into a winery where they've been making wines for decades, I believe there's no need to inoculate with a cultured yeast. The fermentations start quickly, promptly, which is what we're looking for.
Yeah. I think we should taste the Olideo Sonadora and have a look at this. So this is obviously a monastrell. It's 2016. And I think you have it in your glass already, don't you, Simon?
Yep. So just a quick explanation. Olideo, the name Olideo comes from it's a slight deviation on the word Latin word ludeo, I play. So the idea was that we were playing in different playgrounds around Spain, and La Soñadora is the dreamer. So this is made from 100% monastrell. As we said, the fruit is hand harvested. And then taken to the winery, where we run it across a sorting table. I mean, to be honest with you, the fruit quality is so good here and so regular that the sorting table seems almost irrelevant. But one of the main reasons we do it is I like to put in a little bit of whole bunch, just to bring an extra kind of there's the crates going across the sorting table. Put in a little bit of whole bunch just to bring a kind of certain energy to the wine. It brings a little greenness, and also we get because they're going in whole bunch, 10% is going in whole bunch, we get a kind of a semi-carbonic fermentation going on. So which means that we've got 90% of the tank is fermenting, crushed and destemmed, and in the middle there's 10% that's undergoing a semi-carbonic maceration. Which just brings an extra roundness, I feel, to the wine. Yeah. So
I love that sort of sweet kind of carbonic note you get on the nose. It gives you that sort of sweet, almost wild berries, very ripe wild berries. It's lovely.
Yeah, exactly.
And obviously with monastrell, it's a very bright purple color, isn't it? It has higher anthocyanins, and so it gives you a lovely depth in the glass.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's really lovely about monastrell is you get, as you say, there's lots of anthocyanins, so you get lots of great color. You always get very fine tannins, it's quite a small berry with relatively thick skins, but the quality of tannins is already really good. So you notice that the tannins finish here on the front of your teeth, which is the quality fruit tannins that we're looking for. And it generally has aromas of kind of leather and dark black fruits, but also really good acidity. And that's so, post fermentation, we age it for in 600 litre French barrels for a year. So it needs to have that fruit concentration and structure to be able to support the wood aging as well.
I love the sort of lift on the finish, and as you say, the tannins are just very well formed. They've got a sort of grainy but almost filigree texture that just adds to that freshness. I mean, I don't know, is the pH is probably not very high on this, but not very low on this, but it does feel there is a freshness there that carries it through.
Yeah, no, it's I was just checking I couldn't remember exactly what the pH is, but it's 3.65, which is not low.
Yeah. But it's not high either.
It's not high. Sometimes in the Rhone we can have wines that can come in, like I think if I remember in 2019, in some parts of the Southern Rhone we had things coming in at 3.9, even 4. So 3.65 is pretty good. And just to reiterate, that one of the reasons that we chose this project as Tindal Wine Merchants was because this area has this possibility, through its natural landscape and through the major grape variety that's planted there, to produce this kind of wine. We want for the company to have wines that have freshness, fruit, elegance. So we got to seek out these areas. I think, if I can say that, heretofore it's been the area of Yecla is not that well known. It did get it started to get renowned probably in the late 90s, when the American wine critic Robert Parker sort of discovered the wines of the area. And I think that there was a tendency for a while for some of the producers in the area, to begin making wines that were pleasing to his palate. And perhaps with a bit of retrospect, we kind of realize now that some of the wines that he liked could be very impressive and rich, but didn't necessarily it's not that they didn't age, it was more that they weren't necessarily wines for the table, for having a meal with. So and as we over the last decade or so come away from that style to produce wines of more freshness, we've also begun to produce wines which go better at the table with food. And I think that the region is kind of now beginning to show its potential. Not so much raisiny, jammy wines, more crunchy fruit and higher acidity.
Yeah, that's a really valid point, because when you've got a lovely sort of local stew or something, if you have a big, brash, ripe wine with lots of American oak, new American oak or new French oak, it just will totally make, you're overdoing it, aren't you? So this is lovely. The freshness is there. You've got that savory edge. I might have to have it with my pork tonight.
I think. I mean, you touched on something there. I think the thing is, I find very interesting, and where there's still work for us to do, is on the choice of oak. As a winemaker, as a new. I like to call myself a young winemaker, as a sort of, that's in the sense of new.
You are a young winemaker, Simon.
I think one of the interesting things is really the discovery of oak, and which forests, which toasting works best with which regions and which grape varieties and which style of wine that you're trying to produce. Certainly, I think that for the Mediterranean grape varieties, we're seeing more and more move towards larger formats. So the demi-muit, 600 litres, and then even the food wine, anything from 1,000, 2,000 litres upwards, that generally brings support to the wine rather than adding a layer of oak to the wine. So, we're looking for tighter grained, less charred, less toasted styles of barrel.
Yeah, exactly. And talking about that, I think we're going to have to do an oak masterclass one day as well, because you have been doing a lot of research into it and a lot of experimentation more than research, which is fascinating. So we've kind of gone from monastrell, from the Yecla over to sort of the Madrid area and the Sierra dos Gredos. Will you pronounce it properly for me, Simon? Because you are more of a linguist than I am.
Sierra de Gredos.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. And this is much more sort of lush and green. Tell us more about the area.
So William and I, so it's William Tindal and I first went there at the beginning of 2017. And I have to say, I think we were both just blown away by what we saw. When you get into that, up onto that plateau around Madrid, hand on heart, I don't think it's the most beautiful landscape around Madrid and La Mancha. It's flat and quite arid. But when you drive an hour west of Madrid, you arrive in the foothills of the Sierra de Gredos, and you start climbing up, and this is up near San Martin de Valdeiglesias, which is actually in the lower part of that's Sobreros, which is the higher part of the.
Sorry, I think I'll go back to the lower part.
That's okay. And you discover this mountainous area with these lakes, and it's green, and this landscape that much more familiar to me in a sort of Rhone way. The vineyards are kind of plotted out all over the place. They're patchwork. It's not all beautiful straight lines, you're a world away from Madrid. Yeah, so this is when you go even further northwest from San Martin up towards Sobreros, and Sobreros is at the moment the highest.
Shall I show a picture, a map of Spain, just so we have a?
Yeah.
Let me just stop sharing for a minute, and I'll show a map of Spain. Hopefully, hold on 1 minute. Bit of rearranging. Sorry to interrupt you there. I just think it would be good, wouldn't it? As she says, I'm trying to get it to full screen now. Share screen. If you were all in the same room, it'd be handy. There we go. Okay, here we go. Have you got the map there?
Yeah.
So if I do my little spotlight. Oh yeah. Okay. So here we are. So here's Madrid. Yeah.
Yep.
And it basically, if you direct me to whereabouts.
So just where if you just go slightly west of Madrid, keep going up, we are there, about there.
Okay.
Right there is where we're talking about. So if you see Avila, which is slightly further northwest, Avila is kind of the next point on. So the Sierra de Gredos sits between Avila and Madrid. But it's an hour's drive west of Madrid. So
here, look, there's the Sierra de Gredos mark from there.
Yeah,
it's a little bit more that way, you're saying. Yeah. So, and because that's I just find it fascinating that these regions around Madrid haven't been discovered, because when we try the wine, the terroir is just perfect for producing.
Well, I think one of the issues, Harriet, has been that to date, and this is all changing now, but to date it was all lumped under the category of Viñas de Madrid. So this large area that took in vineyards around Madrid, and didn't really differentiate between this mountainous area and the plain. Now Sierra de Gredos is being separated out. Mentrida just to the yellow area just to the south there, it's separating itself out. And I think that, so there's better definition, because if you said to somebody, have you tried a wine from Sierra, as the Viñas de Madrid, that's a huge catch-all, covering lots of different styles. It was lacking perhaps some sort of definition and precision.
Yeah. While we're on the map, I'll just go back and show everyone Yecla.
Yep.
If you were looking, you can see it's further south, a little bit closer to the coast.
Yeah.
But obviously, it would be a warmer climate there, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Interesting enough, when you're in Alicante and when you're in Yecla, in the summer, it can be a 15-degree temperature difference between the town of Yecla and the city of Alicante.
Okay. Well, let's try the Oludeo. I love the way I really can't say anything today. The Suenos Olvidados. Yeah, I love the label as well.
Yeah. So the Sueños Olvidados is Forgotten Dreams. And I think that the reason we chose this name was that it's important to understand what's happened in the Sierra de Gredos over the last number of years. It's a 2,000 hectare area, but about 60% of the vineyards have been abandoned.
Okay,
and
I was going to ask you about that, because when you look at the vineyards, there's one here with William standing there. Like they don't look like they're worked, regularly.
so there is. I think this is great photo, because as I said earlier, there's nothing uniform about these vineyards. If you're used to going to, I don't know, Bordeaux or other parts of the world where you see line after line after line of very neatly trimmed, vertical shoot position trained vines. This is the polar opposite, and you have these huge boulders just positioned randomly in the middle of the vineyard. Obviously, they couldn't take them out, so they just plant around them, and this sort of plant where you can kind of approach. But what happened was that the big local market in theory should be Madrid. But I think what we've seen in the history of the Spanish wine production has been the power of certain regions. Obviously, Rioja being probably the world's most famous Spanish wine region, and so producers in Rioja became very powerful. They then moved to other areas to buy land, like Ribera del Duero, Rueda. Some have moved even into the Rías Baixas to buy up Albarino vineyards. And as they do so, because they have such well-established distribution channels, they've been able to push those wines to the fore, even in areas where there are local vineyard productions, such as the Viñas de Madrid. If you go to Madrid, it's more difficult to find wines from the Sierra de Gredos, which is only an hour up the road, than it is from Rioja and Ribera del Duero, that are several hours away. And the same goes, go to any region around Spain, you find the same thing. So there was no local market, and the market was dying on its feet. So more and more people just walked away from the vineyards because there was no market.
It's so sad, but also looking at the vineyards, they're low bush vines, they're hard to work, they're on gradients, the younger generations, they'd rather go and work in the city and software or something than work in the vineyards creating Absolutely. These wines. And that's kind of why, excuse the pun, they're there for the picking. So you can make wines from these old vines. Isn't that true?
That's right. I mean, and I think what it's a very interesting thing, because you see it time and time again. You see the rise of a vineyard area, perhaps several hundred years ago, then its gradual decline, and then suddenly people who are fascinated by exploring different areas suddenly see the potential, and they go in and they're able to pick up really interesting vineyard plots, re-establish them, and bring, the wine world is now perhaps more curious and understands there are lots of unexploited vineyard areas around the place, and so we suddenly see this renaissance. And this is a vineyard in Sobreros where the soil is more slate, more schist than lower down. But Sobreros, you've got people like Commando G, Commando G, who have become cult producers in the area. I'm going to forget his name now as well. The guy who owns Remoluri in Rioja.
Telmo
Rodriguez. Yeah. He's making wine in Sobreros as well, and so suddenly the attention is back on the areas. People realize there's great potential here.
Yeah, well, how old are those vines? I mean, they're very short and stumpy, obviously, but you can see they're gnarly old lads.
Yeah, so this vineyard actually belongs to somebody else, but if I remember when I visited it, I think they're around sort of 60, 70 years old.
Yeah.
100-year-old garnacha vines is no problem at all.
Because the concentration is amazing from those kind of wines. Let's try the 17 vintage of the Oliveidados. And I love the fact when I overthink something, I can't say it, but when I don't, because it does roll off the tongue. It's a lovely name for a wine, but not when you're sitting on a Zoom tasting trying to pronounce it all. So this is the 17 vintage, which is the vintage we're on at the moment, and we're going to try the 18 vintage as well. So tell us a bit about this, Simon.
So we're very fortunate to work with a local grower called Fernando Ocaña, and we use his winery to make the wine. He is in San Martin de Valdeiglesias, so a bit lower down in the Sierra de Gredos. And this particular vineyard that we rent the vineyard, and the vineyard has now locally become known as Los Irlandeses, the Irish. And it is what's really interesting about the vineyard is you'll see from this photograph, the soil is a very kind of friable granite soil, very loose granite.
Okay, because I was going to ask you about that, because is that the same vineyard?
No, so
okay.
In fact, if you go on to the so this is the vineyard we're talking about, but it's in the same area. But you see from the soil, it's very sandy, but it's actually quite crystallized granite. And what's the advantage of this is that the soil doesn't retain heat at night; it loses all its heat. And so we get this great different temperature change between the daytime and the nighttime, and that really helps us retain plenty of acidity in the grape. Now we get enough water in this area to be able to cope. Sometimes sandy soils are good for that coolness, but if you're in a very hot area where there's a lack of water, that can cause a problem. Obviously with fully ripening, but it's just about perfect here. So we get this. What this does is we get these. The vines are about 70 years old, and the quite small crop per vine. And as you see again, the spacing between the vines is very large. So the overall yield is quite small. And what we do is the grapes are hand harvested, like they are with the La Soñadora, taken to the winery. That's another photograph of it. And you see olive trees planted right in the middle, etc.
Yeah, is that an olive tree there?
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
My taste buds were tingling when I saw that picture.
So we're only getting kind of like a kilo and a half tops per vine. So hand harvested, taken to the winery, and then we destem and crush 85% of the grapes, and 15% go in whole bunch. Same idea with La Soñadora. We have this layer in the middle of whole bunch, surrounded by a traditional fermentation on either side. And again, temperatures are kept quite low to keep the fruity side of the wine. And I think what's important is, as I mentioned at the beginning about sympathetic winemaking, is we only do one pump over a day. So that is to say, we take the juice from the bottom of the tank and we put it back over the cap of skins on the top of the tank. And we do this with the pump set at its slowest speed. So it's really just wetting the skins that are on the top. And so it's a very gentle extraction.
There's a real fragrance about this wine, Simon. You know, I love it's almost floral in character. You can sort of smell sort of wild herbs, or you know, it's
absolutely. And I think so. I think it's very interesting saying that, Harriet, because actually one of the things about garnacha from the Sierra de Gredos, this is 100% garnacha, is this really floral, perfumed character that they have.
It's just lovely. Yeah. And on the palate, as you say, you know, you are very gentle with your maceration techniques, so we don't get a big tannic sort of kick. There is a lightness and a freshness, and you can see that from the color as well. It is a very pale, sort of ruby garnet color.
One of the things I decided to do here was at the end of the fermentation, alcoholic fermentation. So once all the sugar had been metabolized by the yeasts, we took the free run wine off the skins and aged that in barrel. The press wine, so the wine that came from pressing the skins afterwards, was actually set aside and will go to produce another wine. So this is just 100% free run as well.
That's why it's lovely. It's not at all biting or grippy. It's just very smooth and supple.
Yeah,
and obviously the color as well.
Yeah, I mean,
I could pull the piss out of you slightly, Simon, and say, "Are you trying to make a rosé?" Yeah.
well, you could say, "Am I trying to make a Pinot Noir?"
Yeah, exactly. It is. It is very. And you know what? I'm so impressed with these wines is the fact that obviously, you know, winemaking in Spain is, you know, you can get more value there. The land is cheaper. These old vines, you can get hold of the grapes from them for a relatively good price. So, I mean, you know, this on the shelf is $18.99. And it is an outstanding, to sort of, you know, be a bit boring, fine wine. And the Sonadora, you know, it's a monastrell like no other from Yecla. You can get sort of monastrells that are very basic, that are all fruit and taste like you would be very hard pushed to identify it as that grape variety from Yecla, but yours has a sense of sight and a sense of the variety. And that, just on the commercial side, is in all goods sort of off licenses around Ireland, $16.99. So, you know, we're looking at wines that are really affordable here, aren't we? Yeah.
I mean, I think it's this, you know, it's the emergence of these areas that they are being, you know, there's a renaissance going on, and they haven't been able to. There's a really good picture of the soil.
Unfortunate one of William.
This vineyard is actually planted with a variety called Olideo, which is the white grape variety from the area. And it's interesting. I'm kind of holding my counsel on Olideo for the moment. I'd like to see a bit more of it. It's very early ripening, so the harvest is already happened or is happening at the moment. You know, end of August, sometimes middle of August.
Yeah.
It has sort of
flavors would struggle to catch up, wouldn't they, if it's being harvested in the heat of the summer as such? Yeah,
and it tends to have quite low acidity. So yeah, I'd say let's wait and see. It's just this, I think, just shows the beauty of the region. It's just spectacular.
It is amazing.
A lot of people from the city would go up there for weekends because it's only an hour away.
It's really lovely. So should we taste the 18 vintage to compare the two vintages? So the 18 vintage and the vintage variation in around the sort of Madrid area, is there much of a variation, or is it very similar year on year?
No, there is actually there's a good bit of variation. So 17 was very much characterized by as a dry year, which resulted in quite small berries with thicker skins. 18, there was a lot more rain. There was a lot more work done in the vineyards to keep everything clean and healthy. But actually, by the time the harvest came around, I think I'm not going to say it's better. It's just different. It's got the fact that the berries weren't quite so small has resulted in a even finer tannic profile.
That's it. That's what I was going to say. It's very elegant, this one, isn't it?
Yeah.
It has a little bit more, the tannins are a bit more upright. They're at the front a little bit more, but they're very well formed. And the fruit is a little bit richer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the other thing that's very important to note here is that so in 2017, we used 600 litre barrels from French oak Demi-Muid puncheons, and we bought those from Chateau Malatic-la-Gravière in Pessac-les-Oignons, which had been used to make white wine previously. So 2017 was the first year that the wine went into those barrels, and so the barrels had quite a lot to give in terms of
oxidation, isn't it?
And volatile compounds.
Yeah.
So whereas 18, they'd already had a red wine in them previously by this stage.
Yeah.
And so they were beginning, in my mind, to get better adapted to
this is a fascinating exercise, even in just that knowledge, because you can see that obviously the pores were more open for the 17. It's more an oxidative style, with the savory tones, the leather, and you can see that the 18 is a little bit less oxidative and a sort of crunchier, more clarity on the flavors, perhaps. That's really fascinating. You see all these things you don't realize that come in when you're making winemaking decisions and really affect the style of the wine afterwards, despite it being larger, older oak barrels, And
I think also one thing I find personally really interesting is that, my winemaking experience primarily is in France. I have a vineyard in the Rhone. We did this project in Spain, so I brought that knowledge to Spain. We bought French oak barrels out of Bordeaux, and yet the wine is unmistakably Spanish.
You
couldn't, you put that into a blind tasting, people would go, "That's Spanish." And it shows you how much actually the terroir still shines through. All those wild herbs and everything that are growing around the countryside are reflected back into that wine. Yeah,
I know, it's fantastic. It's showing. They really stand to you, Simon. I think I've said this before, and I'll say it again. You are a very good winemaker.
Sympathetic winemaker.
You just need to up the ante and get a better car, according to Lucas.
I think that for me, the project has been just amazing. Have this opportunity to go and represent the company and make wines in these areas, and I think that we've, you and I have spoken about it, that there are other areas we need to potentially look at within Spain that have the same potential. The future, I think, is incredibly bright for this for Spain as a wine producing country. We understand what the classical regions are and how good they can be, but it's really the potential of the unexplored areas or areas that are going to go through a renaissance that's the really exciting bit.
And this is what I love. When we had our discussion about Olideo and we were looking at all the other opportunities, I freely admit that I'm a little bit computer tired, having not visited a vineyard thanks to bloody COVID. And I just loved your enthusiasm, and I just, it set me thinking. And I've come up with lots of ideas for you, Simon. But what I love about you, and I'll finish on this thought for everyone listening, is the fact that you have an adventurous spirit. You don't want to make Merlot in the fertile plains of the Languedoc. None of that easy stuff. You want to climb rocks, you want to scale isolated spots, and you want to find old vines ready to produce inspirational wines at reasonable prices. And do you know what? It's great to see, because COVID hasn't slowed you down. neither has, anything that happened in the last few years, and watch this space. Thank you, Simon. And just a little bit of commercial sort of interim, because these things are necessary when we have people watching, and we try really, really hard to produce lots of really strong knowledge-based content on wine. We have our podcast, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, which you can find on SoundCloud and Spotify. There are quite a lot of episodes piling up there. Content of this will probably go into it, but it is a very easy way to learn about wine or listen to what's going on in the wine world. We have our Instagram lives on Fridays at 6 with Searsons. And most importantly of all, we want to thank all our partners, all of those independent off licenses, and our hotels and restaurants, and everyone who's supported us over COVID. And for those of you looking to find suppliers of the Olideo wines, you can find them, amongst others, I might have missed some, at Green Man Wines, Searsons obviously, Donnybrook Fair, Morton's of Galway, Morton's of Dublin, Nolan's Butcher in Kilcullen. There's a couple of good super values around the country that have it, so it is quite widely spread around Ireland. So you can pick up your bottle of amazing value Spanish wine produced by our incredible winemaker Simon Tyrrell quite easily. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Harriet. Pleasure.